There is a silence in the desert that seems older than time itself, an almost invisible sound, which vibrates between the grains of sand and the wind, as if Egypt still whispers secrets that humanity forgot to hear. They say the desert doesn't speak, but whoever stops to listen realizes something different, an echo that comes from long before the pharaohs, from an era in which heaven and earth were still. They walked side by side. Imagine yourself there, facing the golden plains of Abydos, where the first symbols were engraved in stone when the world was still learning to name the sacred. The sun rises like a memory, and each ray touches the sand as if awakening memories that have been sleeping for millennia. Before there were empires, before the pyramids and golden kings, there was an Egypt silent, a pre-dynastic Egypt, a mysterious people, with no known writing, but capable of aligning temples to the stars with precision that not even modern science fully understands. Who were these? Hands that erected monuments before there were pharaohs? Simple men guided by chance? Or heirs of knowledge that came from the stars? From masters that myth itself, would you call them gods? Archaeologists speak of a primitive culture, clay villages, tools, rudimentary agricultural rituals. But the soil says something else. Under layers of sand, traces of technology, symmetry and sacred geometry emerge. Sites like Nabta Playa show astronomical alignments that predate Stonehenge in millennia. And while the books claim that Egypt was born from the Nile, the stones seem to say that it was born from heaven. If you feel like certain things are no coincidence, maybe this video is what you needed to hear. Because there is a fine line between myth and memory, and when science is silent, the spirit keeps asking. There are those who say that pre-dynastic Egypt was just the first rehearsal of civilization. But what if it was the last echo of something much older? And if, behind the masks of the gods, there are memories of beings who descended to rekindle a dormant flame in the human soul? The very name Kemet, the Black Land, seems to hide a metaphor, the place where light germinates from the shade. Today we will walk together through the sands of that forgotten time. We will revisit traces, signs, and questions that resist the silence of centuries, not to prove a theory, but to feel, like someone touching the trail of a star fallen to the earth. The desert is alive, and perhaps if we listen with our hearts, he still tells the story of when man, he learned to look at the sky and recognize there the reflection of his own origin. But who taught man to look up? This answer may be written in the oldest stones in Egypt. Before the name of Cheops echoed over the pyramids, before the scribes recorded the first hieroglyph, there was an Egypt without a king, without temples, without borders. The banks of the Nile were just the mirror of a night sky, and its inhabitants, still anonymous, they looked at the stars as if searching for a forgotten memory. It was the time of the shepherds of the wind, as some ancient texts called it. Simple communities, but endowed with a cosmic intuition that surprises even those scholars today. Archaeologists call this period pre-dynastic, an era between 7000 and 3100 BC, marked by isolated villages, rudimentary ceramics, and modest tombs. But among these primitive traits, there is something that does not match the chance of history. Small sculptures with perfect shapes, pigments that defy time, objects cut with microscopic precision. How could a people, supposedly without advanced metallurgy, work quartz and diorite, materials that not even modern tools cut easily? The official answer talks about patience and trying, but there is a point where human patience encounters the impossible, and that's where the mystery begins. In the sands of Nabta Playa, archaeologists discovered a circle of stones, aligned with the constellations of Orion and Sirius, dated to more than 7,000 years ago. In other words, millennia before the pyramids. These formations were not simple agricultural monuments. They marked solstices, and they served as high-precision astronomical observatories. Whoever erected them understood the movement of the stars with a rigor that would only reappear much later in dynastic Egypt. This indicates continuity, or inheritance. What was lost between Nabta Playa and Giza? How primitive. People could suddenly build pyramids made of millions of blocks perfectly level, aligned to true north with an error of less than 4 minutes bow. The most prudent answer would be to say, evolution. But maybe it wasn't just that. Perhaps what we call evolution was the memory of something very old, a knowledge that fell asleep in the dunes and was reactivated when the time came. Some independent Egyptologists suggest that Egypt did not learn over time, but remembered. May civilization be born, not of linear progress but of a return, the return of a lost wisdom, transmitted by masters that legends would call the gods who came down from heaven. The hieroglyphs themselves, when they appear ready, complete, sophisticated, without apparent learning period. There is no Egyptian pre-writing. It's as if someone had simply reintroduced the symbolic language that expresses the invisible. In the temples of Abydos and Dendera, inscriptions mention the Zep Tepi, the times, primordial, when the gods walked among men and taught the arts of construction, medicine, and light. The priests said that everything Egypt did was an attempt to remember what the gods had shown. Were they just myths, or fragments of a real story, kept in the form of spiritual allegory? Science prudently avoids responding, but the desert continues to witness something that dates cannot explain. In places like Hierakonpolis and Nakata, ancient ceramics display ancient patterns, geometric shapes, identical to those found in distant cultures, as if a single mind symbolic had inspired people from different continents. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the same type of coincidence is repeated in the Andes, in Mesopotamia, and even in the ruined submerged waters of Japan. Perhaps what we call Predynastic is not the beginning, but the middle of a story much longer. A bridge between worlds, the ancient and the eternal. And perhaps the true birth of Egypt did not take place on the banks of the Nile, but the moment someone coming from far away taught man how to transform stone in symbol and silence in temple. If something inside you is awakening, stay until the end. The answer may be here, between the lines of a civilization that may never have forgotten where it came from. But if Egypt inherited wisdom from the heavens, where does this inheritance manifest itself? Na's pyramids, or within us? There is a moment in the timelines when archaeology falls silent. Suddenly, Egypt, which for millennia lived on villages and agricultural rites, awakens and raises pyramids with millimeter precision, monumental temples, and a complete cosmology. There is no learning interval. There is no gradual evolution. There is only one leap, a chasm between what humanity was and what suddenly became. Scientists call this leap a civilizing revolution, but perhaps, for the ancients, it was a memory, the return of a wisdom that had already they knew, but that time had fallen asleep. The pyramids of Giza are the culmination of this enigma. The largest of them, Cheops, has 2.3 million blocks, some weighing more than 70 tons, arranged with an almost imperceptible alignment error. Even with modern technology, it would be a colossal challenge. And yet we are told that everything was built in just 20 years with hammers of copper and linen ropes. The accounts don't close. Neither time, nor technique, nor human logic fully explain it. There is something there that resists simplification, something that reeks of purpose, of intelligence beyond strength. Researchers such as Christopher Dunn identified marks of rotational drilling and symmetrical cuts impossible to reproduce with tools from Bronze Age. Others, such as Robert Bauval, observed that the three main pyramids line up exactly with the stars of Orion's belt, reflecting on the ground the celestial design of the god Osiris, the lord of renewal and life after death. Could it be a coincidence, or confirmation, that the builders weren't just erecting a tomb, but a mirror of heaven? Even the interior of the Great Pyramid defies logic. If it had been just a tomb, why are there no inscriptions, ornaments, or remains? Mortals, why are there hidden chambers and conduits that point to specific constellations? As if was the structure itself an astronomical or energetic instrument. In 2017, a cosmic muography scan revealed a huge, still-sealed void above the Grand Gallery, a space no man has seen since the monument was erected. What's inside remains a secret, but the deepest mystery may not lie in what is hidden in the stones, but in what that reveals itself through them. Because when looking at the whole of Giza, something seems evident. The pyramids were not built just to store bodies, but to wake up consciences. The ancients said that the pharaoh climbed the ladder of light to meet the gods, perhaps a metaphor for the spiritual ascension of the soul, guided by frequencies and geometric proportions that imitate the cosmos itself. Modern science is beginning to confirm that the interior of the pyramids resonates with vibrations, specific acoustics, capable of amplifying sounds and even generating electromagnetic fields subtle. It's as if the stones breathe. What if the pyramids were symbolic machines for connecting the human and the divine? Its corridors would be the body, its chambers the heart, and the apex, the tip that, and touch the sky, the point of contact with the source. An ancient language expressed in stone and number, where each measurement speaks to infinity. This hypothesis does not deny science, it enlarges it, because perhaps the true mystery is not outside reason, but above it. When looking at Egypt, we see two stories coexisting: what archaeology explains with precision, and what the soul senses in silence. Between the two, there is a bridge, the mystery that forces us to choose not what is more easy to believe, but what calls us most deeply. What if the builders of Egypt had not come from heaven in ships of fire, but in waves of consciousness, transmitting knowledge through inspiration, geometry, and vibration? Perhaps the gods from heaven are a metaphor for the descent of knowledge superior, an inner visit that awakens the human to his own divine potential. If this idea resonates with you, it's no coincidence. Stay until the end. Because what follows isn't a theory, it's a memory, an ancient echo that speaks of the time when knowledge was not separated from the sacred. But who were these light bearers who rekindled the fire of wisdom in the heart of the desert? They say that the first person to teach man to write was not a scribe, but a god. His name was Thoth, the lord of wisdom and speech, he who transformed the sound in symbol and the symbol in light. In Egyptian mythology, Thoth was not just a god, was the mirror of the divine mind, the architect of harmony, the mediator between the visible and the invisible. He is described as one who stepped down from the boat of millions of years, a metaphor which many interpret as a celestial ship, but which, spiritually, represents the descent of higher consciousness to earth. Thoth taught men to measure time, observe the stars, and understand the power-vibrant word. With him, the first formulas of the sacred appeared, the hymns, the numbers, and the proportions that would shape the architecture of temples and pyramids. It was the beginning of a science that did not separate calculation from prayer, geometry from prayer, mind of spirit. This fusion of reason and reverence is what Egypt called Ma'at, the cosmic order that sustains the balance of the universe. Next to Thoth, two other names shine: Isis and Osiris, the bearers of the divine flame that reignited human civilization. According to the Abydos texts, it was Isis who taught healing through plants and the vibration of voice, while Osiris revealed agriculture, law, and justice to men. Together, they represented the cosmic couple, the feminine principle that generates and the masculine that orders, reflecting the very balance of the forces of the cosmos. But the legend does not end with harmony. It speaks of fall and rebirth, of the murder of Osiris by his brother Seth, and of the Isis' long search to reunite the pieces of her beloved body. A myth? Yes, but also a metaphor. Because for Egypt, each part of Osiris spread throughout the world symbolized the fragmented consciousness of humanity, and every act of Isis, the soul's effort to reunite with its divine origin. These gods from heaven were not just mythical characters, they were archetypes, living representations of the forces that shape the human journey: wisdom, love, and souvenir. And it is curious to realize that in all ancient cultures, there are always similar figures: bearers of light, celestial instructors, messengers of harmony. In Sumer, they called us Anunnaki. In India, of Devas. Among the Andean peoples, they were the Viracochas. The names change, but the essence is the same: beings who descended from above to remind men of what they already knew, but had forgotten. In Egypt, the inheritance of these masters was kept in the temples and transmitted through the initiation. Each temple was a school of light, a spiritual laboratory where the body was prepared to support the energy of knowledge. Apprentices learned not only to read hieroglyphics, but to read themselves. They believed that the human body was a living pyramid, a temple where the spirit could ascend step by step to the invisible summit of consciousness. Therefore, initiates called the heart, the throne room, the place where the god, the interior, rests, waiting to be awakened. Thoth, Isis and Osiris were not external worships but internal maps. Each represented an aspect of the soul: knowledge, love, and resurrection. Thoth was the awakened mind, Isis, the love that heals, Osiris, the immortal spark that is reborn. And when meditating on these symbols, the initiate did not invoke distant deities. He activated within himself the same creative power that they represented. Perhaps this is why ancient texts say that the gods are not gone. They sleep in the heart of the righteous. Egypt knew what the eyes call a statue, the spirit recognizes as a mirror. And every time man awakens to his divine essence, a god returns from heaven. The myth of the light bearers is, at bottom, the myth of ourselves. The memory that we, also come from an inner heaven. And perhaps the greatest inheritance of these masters was not the knowledge of the stars, but the invitation to look inside them. But if these gods taught wisdom to a people, why should the same signs appear in so many distant cultures? When we look at Egypt, it seems like it all started there. But maybe Egypt had. It was just the clearest reflection of a much older light. Because as archaeologists unearth the past, what emerges is a pattern global, an echo that crosses continents and millennia, as if a single mind symbolic had inspired civilizations that had never met. In Mesopotamia, the ancient Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki, beings coming from the sky who, they taught men writing, astronomy, and calculation. In Egypt, priests spoke of the Neteru, the creator gods who shaped the world and instructed humanity. In India, the Vedas describe the Devas descending on fiery chariots called Vimanas. And in the Americas, pre-Columbian people honored Viracocha, the white master who came from the sea to restore order after a great cataclysm. Cultures separated by oceans, but united by the same story. Someone came from the sky and brought light. Historians call these similarities cultural coincidence. But what happens when the coincidence is repeated dozens of times, in every point on the planet, with almost identical symbols, numbers, and myths? The spiral, the serpent, the solar eye, the divine triad, the flood, the celestial master, the same. Archetypes that shape Egypt appear in ruins in the mountains of Egypt, Andes, in the inscriptions of India, and in the legends of the Australian Aborigines. It's not just about faith, it's about collective memory, as if humanity carries within itself the fragment of a memory planetary, transmitted through symbols that survive oblivion. See the pyramids. There are more than 40 spread across Central America, dozens in China, structures similar ones in Indonesia, and, of course, the monumental ones in Giza. The engineering changes, the material changes, but the geometry is the same. The sacred mountain that touches the sky. Why would so many civilizations choose the same form to represent the encounter between man and the divine? Perhaps because they all remembered something that could not be said in words, a truth inscribed in the very shape of the ascending light. In ancient India, texts such as the Mahabharata describe energy weapons and vehicles flies that crossed the firmament. In Sumer, clay tablets speak of celestial maps that indicated planets invisible to naked eye. In Egypt, the Book of the Dead describes the solar boat that took the pharaoh back to the stars. There are different languages for the same idea. The sky as the origin, the earth as school, return as a destination. Some scholars, such as Graham Hancock and Robert Schoch, suggest that before the recorded history, there has been an advanced global civilization, destroyed by a cataclysm about 12,000 years. Fragments of this civilization would have been preserved by survivors who, when dispersed, they founded the mother cultures of Egypt, Sumeria, pre-Columbian America, and even from the East. These would be the true gods, not extraterrestrials in the physical sense, but heirs of ancestral knowledge, bearers of a spiritual science capable of unite geometry, vibration, and consciousness. It is possible that Egypt was the heart of this legacy, the place where the memory was kept alive in the form of myth, rite, and stone. Each temple would then be a memory cell, a wisdom capsule designed to resist the oblivion of the world. And perhaps that is why so many Egyptian symbols find an echo in later traditions, in Hebrew Kabbalah, in esoteric Christianity, in medieval alchemy. The flame never went out, it just changed language. When we observe the planet through this prism, we realize that the history of humanity is less a line and more a circle, a spiral of memories that always returns to the same point, the reunion with the origin. Perhaps the gods from heaven were not external visitors, but memories, internal memories of a time when humanity remembered its true luminous nature, a time when science and soul were the same thing, and knowledge did not accumulate, flourished. But if this wisdom was so pure, why was it silenced? What made the man forget what once seemed as clear as the sunrise? There is a point where the story seems to have been carefully erased, as if invisible. Hands had swept away the footprints of the past, leaving only fragments, truncated hieroglyphics, sealed chambers, rewritten myths. Egypt, once the guardian of light, has become an enigma shrouded in silence, and this silence speaks. The pharaohs knew that the power of knowledge was not just in revealing it, but in keep it. Temples were not open to everyone, and sacred scriptures were not taught to curious. Every teaching required inner preparation, because the truth, they said, could blind the eyes that have not yet learned to see. Mystery wasn't a prison, it was a filter. Only hearts aligned with Ma'at, the cosmic order, could withstand the brilliance of the real. On the walls of Dendera, Luxor, and Abydos, there are scenes that many interpret as spiritual rituals, but which others see as something more. Representations of energy, sound, vibration. Dendera lamps, for example, seem to describe a luminous flux within a bulb, connected to serpents, symbols of vital electricity, kundalinic, force, inner fire. Was it just a metaphor? Or a sign of lost knowledge that united physics and soul in the same language? As the centuries passed, Egypt was veiled by successive layers of conquest. Persians, Greeks, Romans. Each empire translated the symbols in its own way, until the original meaning was diluted as paint in the sand. But something remained. In the Coptic monasteries, in the initiatory orders, in the Hermetic schools of the Mediterranean, echoed the same whisper, the wisdom of The pharaohs did not die. It just became hid in those who know how to listen to silence. Maybe that's why the ancients never destroyed their temples. They only sealed them. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was protection. They knew that true wisdom cannot be taught in words, only remembered. And time, that great guardian, would try to reopen the doors when the human heart would look for it again. Today, archaeologists look for evidence in the stones, but perhaps the keys lie within us. Because what? The priests called the Book of Thoth, the work that contained the secret of creation. It was not a material text, but a vibrant consciousness, a frequency that each initiate should awaken in their own heart. The true temple was never made of stone, but of soul, and yet the silence persists. The sealed chambers of the Great Pyramid remain untouched. The papyri disappear. The most powerful symbols are forgotten or ridiculed. It's as if there was a force that fears the awakening of memory. But what is forgotten in the world is remembered in the spirit, and the spirit never forgets. Predynastic Egypt perhaps was not destroyed. Maybe he just changed his plan. And the gods from the sky, previously visible in the sands, have chosen to inhabit the only place where they could never be erased: human consciousness. But what if what we call the end was actually the beginning of a new memory? Oh, that can still awaken in the ruins of time. Maybe Egypt isn't just a place on the map. Maybe it's a state of remembrance, an ancient language written in the human heart itself, waiting for the right moment to be read again. Because every stone, every temple, every symbol, is just the reflection of the same mystery that dwells within us, the longing to return to what is eternal. When we look at the skyline of Giza, we see 3 pyramids pointing towards the sky. But spiritually, there are 3 mirrors facing inwards: body, mind, and soul. And at the point where these 3 lines meet, the inner pharaoh is born, the awakened being, which reminds us that the sky was never far away. Perhaps the gods from heaven did not come down to create man, but to remind him of what he already was. The light that the ancients called divine was not outside. She just waited to be rekindled from within. Time has passed, empires have collapsed, but the call remains. And now, when we look again at Egypt, we do not do so only with eyes of archaeologists, but with eyes of the soul, because we feel that what is hidden in the sands is not just history, it is memory spiritual, waiting for the moment of reunion. The priest said that each human being is an unfinished temple, and that within each heart there is a Ka, an immortal spark, that longs for union with your own sky. When life seems deserted, it is this Ka that guides us. He is the echo of the ancients, the silent voice of Thoth, the memory of Osiris rebuilding the yourself, part by part. And perhaps, each time someone awakens to the sacred, a fragment of Egypt Predynastic rebuilds itself invisibly, not in stone but in consciousness. If this message touched something for you, subscribe and follow us, because perhaps your soul is responding to an ancient call, the same one that echoed among the sands when man learned to look at the sky and recognize the divine in own reflection. The mystery of Egypt does not end with the pyramids, nor with the legends. He continues in every sincere search, in every heart that dares to remember. And if human history is a cycle of forgetting and remembering, perhaps we are finally going back to the beginning, because the true temple is not made of stone. It is born every time someone awakens to the light that has always been there, waiting, silent, beneath the dunes of one's own being. What if what we call the end is just the beginning of a memory that the soul still don't forget? What if Egypt wasn't just telling us the past, but announcing what is yet to come? Because maybe stones don't just hold memories, maybe they hold keys. Keys that do not open tombs, but portals within human consciousness. The time of the gods may have seemed to end, but the time of those who remember has just begun again. In the next video, we'll follow this trail to where it actually points, to the moment when the man looked up at the sky again, and he realized that the sky was also watching him. Continue the journey. The next step may not reveal answers, but perhaps it will reveal who is really asking the questions.